I'm Heather Young. I'm 23 years old, and last Christmas I watched my twin sister Lindsay run outside screaming with joy over a silver Tesla parked in the driveway, a red velvet bow still clinging to the windshield. My dad had his arm around her shoulder while my mom snapped pictures from the porch. Their laughter echoed down the block. I stood off to the side holding a small box wrapped in leftover newspaper. Inside was a chipped piggy bank and 13 crumpled dollar bills. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else got all the credit. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, in a modest 2-bedroom home where every birthday cake was homemade and every dime was stretched twice. Our parents taught us early to be polite, work hard, and put family first. I believed them. I was the quieter twin, the one who organized bake sales and helped Grandma with her prescriptions while Lindsay chased attention like it was air. By the time we turned 18, both of us had been accepted to college. I had plans to study business management, with dreams of one day running something of my own. But that summer, everything changed. Our family's toy store on Beale Street had been barely holding on for years, and the rise of online shopping finally crushed it. I still remember the silence in the house, the night Dad locked the doors for the last time. Groceries became sparse, lights were turned off to save power, and the topic of college disappeared completely, until one night when Mom and Dad sat us down in the living room. Mom's hands were shaking as she folded a blanket in her lap. "We can only afford to send one of you to school," Dad said, his voice quiet. Mom added, "Heather, you've always been the steady one. You can work and help us stay afloat. Your sister needs this opportunity." I looked over at Lindsay, her eyes wide and hopeful like she'd already packed her bags. For campus, the word responsible stung. I was barely old enough to vote and already expected to hold up the weight of a sinking household, but I agreed. I unpacked the duffel bag I'd filled for school and started looking for jobs. I landed a position at a small shipping company downtown, entering invoices and balancing accounts. It was dull, and the fluorescent lights gave me headaches, but I smiled through it, thinking it was temporary, that maybe, just maybe, someone would see how hard I was trying and say thank you. Lindsay, on the other hand, flourished. She posted dorm photos and selfies from concerts while I took the late bus home, clutching discount groceries. Mom would call during her lunch breaks, asking if I could help with the phone bill again or transfer a little extra to cover rent, and I always did. My boyfriend Daniel was the only one who seemed to notice how much I was giving up. He'd leave a latte on my desk on bad days or sit with me quietly on nights when I felt invisible. That Christmas was supposed to be different. I had helped pay off the last of Mom and Dad's store debts, taken online classes at night, and earned a promotion. I told myself they'd notice this time. I came home carrying homemade gifts and a little hope tucked in my coat pocket. The lights were up, the tree sparkled, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls. But when Dad handed Lindsay the car keys and Mom whispered, "You're our star, honey," my heart sank. And when they handed me that ceramic piggy bank with 13 wrinkled dollars inside, I knew something had broken, something that couldn't be fixed with a smile or a thank you. I didn't say a word. Not that night. I just smiled tight and kept sipping my cocoa. But later, as I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at that chipped piggy bank, I realized something was off. Something didn't add up. And when I opened my laptop and checked our shared savings account, what I saw changed everything. I stared at the screen, blinking hard, hoping I'd read it wrong. The number sat there plain as day, $30,000 withdrawn from our joint account just days before Christmas. The same account I'd set up to help our family rebuild the one I'd been quietly adding to over the past year from bonuses and investment returns. The transaction had gone straight to a car dealership. My heart dropped. I didn't need to guess who the car was for. I sat there at the kitchen table, the piggy bank still sitting a few inches away, its chipped surface catching the light. The smell of cinnamon and pine lingered from the evening before. Upstairs, I could hear Lindsay laughing at something on her phone. It all clicked. The red bow, the keys, The stunned silence when I opened my box. I thought the piggy bank was a joke. Now I knew it was worse than that. They'd spent my savings to make her dreams come true. I couldn't bring myself to speak to anyone that night. I slipped out before breakfast, telling Carol I was tired and needed to clear my head. I walked for nearly an hour, just circling our block in the cold, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. When I finally called Daniel, I didn't even get the first sentence out before my voice cracked. He listened, didn't rush me, just let the silence hang until I could breathe again. Later that week, Carol texted me asking for money, said the heating bill was high this month. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I'd spent 5 years telling myself that family came first, that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, they'd see me. But standing there on Christmas morning with a piggy bank in one hand and betrayal in the other, something had shifted. Daniel kept encouraging me to speak up. He reminded me gently that silence didn't protect anyone, not even me. I told him I needed a little more time, but that time came faster than I expected. Carol decided to throw a New Year's dinner. She invited the whole family, made her famous potato salad, and asked me to help set the table. I said yes. The house filled up quickly. Cousins and uncles, neighbors from up the street. Everyone brought something: green bean casseroles, pies, bags of ice. Lindsay floated through the living room like a starlet, phone in hand, grinning at the attention her Tesla was still getting. I stayed in the kitchen folding napkins and lining up forks. Each time Carol asked me to run upstairs for an extra chair or refill the tea pitcher. I nodded, quiet and steady, just like always. Dinner started just after 7. The long dining table was packed. Carol sat at one end, Robert at the other. Lindsay's voice carried down the table as she told a story about a parking app she liked. Robert laughed too loud at her jokes. I watched my hands, watched my fork move through mashed potatoes. I waited. When the conversation slowed and people turned to reach for salt or second helpings, I pushed my chair back. The noise scraped sharply across the hard wood. Heads turned. I took a breath. "I need to say something," I said louder than I meant to. A few people chuckled softly, expecting a toast. I didn't raise a glass. For years I've done what this family needed. I gave up college so Lindsay could go. I've worked overtime, skipped vacations, paid bills that weren't mine, covered debts that weren't mine. I set up a joint account so we could rebuild after the store closed. But last week someone emptied that account, $30,000, without asking. The room fell silent. Even the kids stopped chewing. I reached into my pocket and unfolded a printed bank statement. I held it up. The money went to a car dealership, I said, to buy Lindsay a Tesla. I looked at Carol, at Robert, at Lindsay. No one moved. Carol's jaw tightened. "Heather, this isn't the time," Robert coughed into his napkin. "You didn't ask," I said, steady now. "You took it. I found out by accident." Lindsay crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous. It's just money. You're always so dramatic." I blinked once, then looked around the table. It wasn't just money. It was mine. It was everything I had left after spending years keeping this family together. And you gave it away like it meant nothing. An uncle near the middle cleared his throat. "Is this true?" he asked Carol. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "We thought we had a right," she mumbled. "It's family money." "No," I said. "It was mine. And you didn't even say thank you." Robert's face was red now. "That car was a reward," he said. "Lindsay earned it. She's worked hard." "I worked hard too," I said. "Only difference is you noticed her." Carol's eyes were wet, but she didn't speak. Lindsay rolled her eyes and stood up, knocking her chair sideways. "Whatever. This is pathetic." She stormed out the front door without a coat. I turned and left the table, walked upstairs, packed my suitcase with the things I'd kept in the closet since moving back home, my laptop, some clothes, a photo of me and Daniel at the county fair. When I came back down, Carol was in the hallway, arms crossed. "You're going to walk out over this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No," I said. "I'm walking out because I finally see it clearly. I've always been the backup plan, the helper, the wallet. I'm not doing it anymore." Robert stood near the door. "You walk out." "Now," he said, "you don't come back." I looked at him. I wasn't planning to. I left the house with the suitcase in my hand and the cold night pressing against my skin. I drove straight to Daniel's. He was waiting at the door. No questions. Just a hug that lasted long enough for my shoulders to fall. I spent that night on his couch with a blanket pulled to my chin, hearing my own heartbeat for the first time in years. The next morning, I logged into the joint account one last time. I transferred the remaining balance into my personal account, closed the shared one for good, and blocked every number I needed to block. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew where I wasn't going back. The first few mornings at Daniel's apartment felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. His place was small, just one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a creaky floor that gave itself away with every step. The furniture didn't match the faucet dripped at night, and the windows let in too much street noise. But the quiet inside wasn't heavy. There were no shouted questions from down the hall, no knocks asking for help paying a bill. I'd wake up on the pull-out couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cinnamon and coffee, and realize that for once, no one needed anything from me. Daniel had rearranged his shelves so I had room for my books. He even cleared out a drawer in his dresser, though I hadn't asked him to. Most nights we ate dinner on the couch, our plates balanced on mismatched throw pillows while the TV played some home renovation show in the background. He didn't push me to talk, but he always listened when I did. He made space, and I didn't know how badly I needed that until I had it. I took a part-time job at a coffee shop a few blocks away. It wasn't glamorous, early mornings, steamed milk burns, and customers who acted like the world owed them something, but it was mine. It helped me pay rent, and it gave me structure. I still had some savings left, what hadn't been drained for the Tesla, but I didn't want to touch it unless I had to. Every dollar I spent now, I wanted to earn myself. Evenings were different. Daniel would spread out his design sketches on the kitchen table, working through ideas for his freelance projects. One night he slid a pad of paper across to me. "You've got an eye for detail," he said, smiling. "Try one." I hesitated, then picked up a pencil. The lines weren't perfect, and the proportions were off, but when I finished that first draft of a reading nook, he grinned like I'd hung the moon. He started showing me the basics, color palettes flow, how lighting could shift the feel of a room. I was hooked. Something about the quiet math of space and the way pieces fit together made sense to me. It reminded me of budgeting only warmer. Less numbers, more feeling. We'd spend hours looking through online design portfolios, sketching ideas, debating over fabric swatches we couldn't afford yet. I hadn't felt that kind of energy in years. Spring came fast. The weather warmed, and Daniel got a job redesigning the front of a small bookstore near the riverfront. He asked if I'd help. We spent weekends repainting the walls, rearranging displays, and picking out rugs that wouldn't trip customers. I designed a new counter layout to make checkout smoother, and when the owner smiled and said, "This works better than I imagined," something lit up inside me. I wasn't just supporting someone else's dream anymore. I was building something too. That bookstore job led to another one this time for a small cafe around the corner. The owners wanted something cozy and bright, so I focused on warm wood tones and soft lighting. I designed a reading corner with tall bookshelves and 2 big armchairs we found secondhand and reupholstered together. Customers took photos, posted them online, and business picked up. The owner called it the nook that saved the cafe. Still, things weren't always easy. Money was tight. Some nights I'd lie awake doing the math in my head, wondering how long we could keep it all going. I missed having a steady paycheck. The barista shifts helped, but they weren't enough to build a future on. I considered going back to finance once or twice, sending out resumes I never followed through on. But Daniel always reminded me why I'd left. "You're not their ATM anymore," he'd say, touching my hand. "You're building something for you." I heard bits and pieces about my family through a cousin who worked at a local clinic. Robert had picked up more hours at the hardware store, and Carol was working part-time at a grocery store on the south end of town. Without my contributions, things were rough. The house needed repairs, and Lindsay's car, my old savings on 4 wheels, had reportedly been repossessed after a few missed payments. She'd moved to Nashville chasing a marketing job and leaving Carol and Robert to figure things out on their own. One day I got a voicemail from her. "Heather, we need to talk," she said. Her voice sounded stiff, like she was trying not to sound angry or embarrassed. I deleted it. A week later, Robert sent a text asking if I could help with some unexpected medical bills. I blocked his number again. Daniel never told me what to do, but he always supported whatever choice I made. "You don't owe them your peace," he said once, and I believed him. By midsummer, I started pitching my own design ideas to small clients. A local accountant needed help redoing his waiting room. I offered to take it on for half the going rate just for the experience. He agreed, and I spent 3 weeks sourcing affordable chairs, repainting the walls, and selecting artwork that made the room feel less sterile. When he signed the check and shook my hand, I smiled all the way home. Daniel and I stayed up late that night sketching ideas for our future, what it would look like if we opened a studio together one day. He was the dreamer. I was the planner. He imagined skylights and gallery walls, and I figured out square footage and costs. Somehow it worked. We balanced each other. The more distance I had from that house in Memphis, the more I could breathe. I didn't check Carol's Facebook anymore. I didn't wonder whether Robert still told people I was the reliable one. I had stopped hoping for apologies or explanations. What mattered now was that I'd found a rhythm that felt like mine. Still, one thing kept tugging at the edge of my thoughts, what they took from me that I couldn't replace. That $30,000 was more than just money. It was trust. It was time. It was every missed opportunity I'd swallowed down for someone else's comfort. And the more I built something of my own, the more I realized I wasn't done with that chapter yet. I had left the house behind. I had blocked the numbers. But what they did wasn't just wrong. It was theft. And now that I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, I knew what I needed to do next. The decision came quietly one afternoon while Daniel and I were painting sample boards at the kitchen table. He was talking through ideas for a dental office remodel, but my mind kept drifting. I kept thinking about that account, the savings I'd built piece by piece, holiday bonuses, careful investments, all of it meant to give me a head start in life, and they'd taken it. No apology, no warning, just gone. I opened my laptop and started looking up local attorneys. I wasn't sure what kind of case it was, or if I even had one. But I knew I couldn't leave it alone anymore. What they'd done wasn't just inconsiderate, it was theft, plain and simple. I found a firm downtown that handled small business and personal financial cases. I sent an email with a short explanation. They replied the next morning. A woman named Marlene Fisher could see me that Thursday. Daniel drove me to the meeting, though I hadn't asked him to. He waited in the lobby while I sat across from Marlene in a quiet office filled with books and muted blue furniture. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, but kind. After I explained what had happened, she tapped a pen against her notepad, then looked at the account records I'd printed. "You've got a solid paper trail," she said. "The account was in your name. They withdrew money without your consent and used it for a purchase that didn't benefit you. That's financial misconduct." She paused. "We'd need to file in civil court, but we can absolutely pursue this." I didn't answer right away. It felt strange formalizing what had always been family business. But when I thought about all the years I'd spent covering their bills, the look on Carol's face when I confronted her the way Robert crossed his arms like I was the problem, something in me steadied. "I want to go forward," I said. The process took longer than I expected. There were forms to fill out, statements to gather, and calls with Marlene to clarify everything from my income history to the dates I'd opened the account. I dug up old pay stubs, emails, and screen grabs of the bank's mobile app showing the balance drops. Every night I came home from the cafe and spread documents out on the floor of Daniel's apartment. He'd hand me tea, sit beside me in silence, and help me sort through it all. We filed the claim in early spring. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. Marlene told me it might not go to trial, that sometimes these cases settle before a hearing, but she said to be prepared either way. I was. On the day of the hearing, I wore a navy blue dress and carried a folder with the same piggy bank photo that had haunted me since Christmas. Daniel came too. He wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but he waited just outside with a book in his lap, his eyes tracking the door. Inside, it felt smaller than I imagined. A few rows of benches, a short aisle, and a wooden table where I sat beside Marlene. Carol and Robert came in 10 minutes late. Carol looked thinner than I remembered. Robert's hair had gone more gray. Neither of them looked at me. The judge was a woman in her 60s, even-toned and professional. Marlene spoke first, laying out the timeline of events, my contributions to the account, the unauthorized withdrawal, and the vehicle purchase tied to my sister. She showed the printed bank records, pointed to my name on the account documentation, and described the family dynamics without embellishment. She didn't need to dramatize it. The numbers spoke for themselves. Carol tried to say it had been a misunderstanding, that they believed the money was part of a family effort. Robert stayed quiet for most of it, only nodding along until the judge asked if he had anything to add. "We never meant to hurt her," he said. "We thought she understood." I didn't respond. I kept my eyes on the folder in front of me. The judge took a short recess, then came back with her ruling. She found in my favor. Carol and Robert were ordered to repay the full $30,000 plus court fees. The repayment would happen in monthly installments based on their current income. When the gavel came down, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. Back in the hallway, Daniel stood up as soon as he saw me. I nodded once, and he reached for my hand. We didn't speak until we got to the car. "You did it," he said. "They have to pay it back," I replied. "All of it." We drove home in quiet. The sun was starting to set over the Memphis skyline, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like something was pressing down on my chest. The repayment started a month later. Small amounts at first. I got a check in the mail each time, Carol's handwriting on the envelope, no note inside. Robert never contacted me. Lindsay didn't either. I'd heard through a neighbor that the Tesla was long gone, repossessed after she couldn't keep up with the payments. Some days I thought about them, about whether they blamed me or just moved on. But I didn't reach out. I didn't want explanations. I had clarity now, and that was enough. The court win didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave me something I hadn't had in years, a sense of control. With each check, I felt one piece of my life fall back into place. I used the money carefully, putting some toward debt, saving the rest. Daniel and I were still working freelance, but the momentum was building. Clients were returning calls. Word was spreading. One afternoon, we sat in a booth at the cafe we'd helped redesign. Daniel pulled out a notebook filled with sketches and lists. He turned a page and showed me the words, "Walker and Young Interiors," written across the top. "I think we're ready," he said. I looked at him, at the sketch below the name, at the soft light pouring through the cafe windows, and I nodded. I think so too. Daniel and I didn't open a studio right away. We started small, just a shared name on invoices and a new email address we checked obsessively. Walker and Young Interiors sounded official, even though we were still working out of his living room using folding tables and borrowed tools from a neighbor. But it was ours. Our first few projects came from referrals. A boutique salon needed a fresh reception area. A dentist's office wanted to make the waiting room less sterile. We said yes to everything. We painted walls on weekends, hauled furniture in Daniel's old hatchback, and stayed up past midnight putting together digital mock-ups for clients who hadn't paid their deposits yet. I still worked morning shifts at the cafe. The hours were early, and the tips weren't much, but it kept us going. Some weeks we scraped by on rice and frozen vegetables. Daniel picked up side gigs, assembling shelves, building custom planter boxes, anything that kept us from dipping into savings. The checks from Carol and Robert were still coming in each month, quiet reminders of everything we'd left behind. Despite the struggle, I loved what we were building. There was something steadying about seeing a space take shape. One project led to another, a pediatrician's office, a downtown studio apartment, even a small corner bookstore that wanted a redesign for their reading area. We worked side by side, learning how to balance each other's strengths. Daniel had an eye for bold choices. I focused on flow and function. He'd dream big. I'd make the numbers work. By the time summer rolled around, we were starting to get noticed. A local blog wrote a short feature on one of our projects. A shop owner tagged us in a before and after photo. People started reaching out, not just friends of friends, but strangers. One night, Daniel came home with a stack of fabric samples under one arm and a small box tucked in his coat pocket. He didn't make a big speech. We were standing on the balcony, the city humming in the background, when he reached for my hand. "Heather," he said, "you've built something with me that I didn't even know I needed. Let's keep building it. Together." The ring was simple, silver clean lines, no stone. But it was perfect. I didn't cry, not right away. I just nodded. "Yes," I said, and he smiled like he already knew. We planned something small, a garden ceremony just outside Memphis with wildflowers and folding chairs, nothing extravagant. Daniel's aunt helped with catering. A friend from the cafe baked the cake. We invited close friends, a few of Daniel's cousins, and my coworker from the shipping company who had stayed in touch. I didn't send invites to Carol, Robert, or Lindsay. The ceremony was quiet, just how we wanted it. The sun came out after 2 days of rain, and the trees surrounding the garden still held drops of water that shimmered in the light. I wore a tea-length dress I'd altered myself. Daniel wore his one good blazer, the same one he'd worn the day I met Marlene at the attorney's office. We wrote our own vows. His were about honesty and building a life that wouldn't depend on what anyone else expected. Mine were about trust and the quiet kind of love that shows up every day. When we exchanged rings, I felt something settle inside me, not a weight, but the release of one. The reception was just a few tables strung with lights, a borrowed speaker playing our favorite songs, and a small crowd of people who had stood by us through it all. Daniel held my hand as we walked through it, and every so often I'd catch someone smiling at us, like they understood exactly what this moment meant. Later that evening we stood at the edge of the garden while our guests cleared out. The sun had dropped behind the trees, and the string lights cast soft gold across the grass. "You happy, Daniel?" asked his voice low. I looked at him at the ring on his hand at the path we'd carved from nothing. "I am," I said. "Really, I am." We didn't take a honeymoon right away. We couldn't afford to leave town, and we didn't want to pause the momentum. Instead, we celebrated with dinner at a diner we both liked, a booth by the window burgers, with extra pickles and a milkshake we shared with 2 straws. It didn't feel like settling. It felt like starting. That first week as husband and wife, we signed our names on a new client contract, a small tech company that needed help revamping their office space. It was our biggest job yet. I updated the invoice template to include Walker & Young interiors across the top, this time in bold. Back at home, we converted the corner of our living room into a proper workspace. I organized a shelf with binders and budget sheets. Daniel pinned up a mood board for the new project. We were tired, a little broke, and busier than ever. But the air in that apartment felt different now, like we'd finally stepped into something solid. One afternoon, just after lunch, I checked the mail and found a plain white envelope tucked between a utilities flyer and a coupon booklet. There was no return address, just my name printed in block letters across the front. I stood by the mailbox a while before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper folded once. The handwriting was familiar, tight, neat, careful. It was from Carol. She didn't say much, just that she hoped I was doing well, that she was sorry if things had gotten out of hand. She wrote that Robert wasn't sleeping much and Lindsay had stopped calling. There was no direct apology, no mention of the money or the trial or the Tesla, just a few clipped lines about missing family and a hope that maybe someday we'd talk again. I held the paper in my hands for a long time before folding it back up and placing it on the shelf next to the modem. I didn't respond. That same week, I received the final repayment installment, 30 checks over 30 months. I counted them once more, flipped through the ledger I'd kept in the drawer beneath our desk, and marked the last box with a small, steady check mark. I hadn't told Daniel it was the final one. I wasn't sure I needed to. We had just finished a project for a small medical clinic outside of town, a waiting room redesign with soft blue walls and honey-colored lighting. The work had gone smoothly. The client was happy. I had even picked out the artwork for the walls myself. When we locked up the door that evening, Daniel suggested we stop by the lake nearby. It was warm enough to sit for a while without jackets, and the water was still. We sat on the hood of the car and watched the sky darken. Daniel pulled out a container of strawberries and passed it to me. We didn't talk about work or money or what was next. We just watched the light change. Back at home, I pulled out the ledger and flipped through the first few pages. The early entries were messy numbers scrawled in the margins, notations made during phone calls with Marlene, records of each court filing and check received. Over time, the entries had gotten cleaner, more deliberate. I'd started using colored tabs for milestones: first deposit, halfway point, final check. I'd never planned to keep it so carefully, but I had. Daniel found me at the table later that night, the ledger still open, the letter from Carol resting nearby. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "It's done. All of it." He placed a mug of tea beside my hand and sat across from me. We didn't speak for a while. He looked at the pages I'd filled, then reached over and gently closed the cover. "You want to keep it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." That spring, we finished our largest project yet, a boutique hotel downtown that had hired us to redesign the guest lounge and entryway. We chose soft textures, neutral tones, warm brass fixtures. I sketched dozens of lighting layouts before settling on one that made the room feel open without being cold. Daniel built a custom bench by hand for the window wall. It turned out better than either of us imagined. At the opening reception, the owner stood beside us in the middle of the finished space and thanked us in front of the gathered guests. He talked about how the design had elevated the entire brand. He called us partners. My name was printed on the plaque by the front desk. Later that night, back in our apartment, Daniel opened the fridge and pulled out a small bottle of sparkling cider we'd saved for something special. He poured 2 glasses and raised his. "To all the rooms we haven't built yet," he said. I smiled, clinked my glass against his, and took a sip. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what had been taken from me. I was thinking about what I'd made out of what was left. It had been more than a year since I'd stepped foot on my parents' porch. The street still looked the same: cracked pavement, the neighbor's leaning mailbox, a front yard that hadn't seen a rake in months. Daniel waited in the car engine, idling softly, while I stood at the base of the steps, holding an envelope in my hand. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I just slid the envelope through the mail slot and turned back toward the street. It was a letter. Not a reply, not a reconciliation. Just a clean, final note letting Carol and Robert know the repayments were complete and there would be no further contact. I wished them well. Nothing more. Daniel didn't ask any questions when I got back in the car. He just reached across the console and squeezed my hand. We didn't talk much on the way home. That summer, Walker and Young Interiors signed a lease on our first real office space. It wasn't big, just 2 rooms above a bakery near the riverfront, but the windows let in good light, and the walls were sturdy enough to hold our sample boards. We painted one wall a soft gray-blue and hung up sketches from our earliest projects. Daniel surprised me one afternoon by mounting a small brass plaque beside the door. It read, "Walker and Young." Below it, in smaller letters, "Interior Design and Creative Direction." I ran my fingers over the engraving for a long time. Clients came and went. Some weeks were busier than others. We started working with a contractor named Jake, who helped with build-outs, and we brought in a part-time assistant to help with scheduling and orders. I still handled the financials. Daniel took the lead on presentations. The rhythm felt right. One Friday afternoon, just as we were packing up for the weekend, the front desk phone rang. Our assistant Mia answered. She handed me the receiver with a puzzled look. "It's for you," she said. "Didn't leave a name." I took the call in the back room. The voice on the line was quiet, careful. It was Lindsay. She didn't ask how I was or where I'd been. She just said she was calling from Nashville, that things had been rough. The job she took after school hadn't lasted, and the people she thought would help hadn't followed through. She mentioned the Tesla briefly, just that it was gone, nothing more. "I saw the studio website," she said. "It's, really nice." I thanked her. I didn't ask why she called. After a pause, she said, "I've been thinking about everything, about how it all played out. She stopped. I wanted to say, "I hope you're okay." There was no apology. Not really. But her voice sounded different. Smaller, maybe. Or just tired. I told her I was fine, that I hoped she was doing what she needed to do to get back on her feet. Then I told her I had to go. We ended the call quietly. I didn't block her number. I just didn't save it either. That weekend, Daniel and I drove out to a farm market an hour outside of town. We filled a basket with peaches and Bread bought wildflowers from a girl selling stems out of old mason jars. On the drive home, Daniel turned to me at a red light and asked if I wanted to put the new nameplate up at home too, something for our apartment door. "No," I said. "Let's wait." He nodded. We spent that night in eating grilled cheese and watching reruns. He fell asleep halfway through the second episode, his arm draped across the back of the couch. I stayed up a little longer scrolling through our recent client photos, a small dental practice, a music studio with velvet curtains, a family-run bakery with copper fixtures and wood shelves I helped design from scratch. Every project had a folder, every invoice was labeled, every drawing archived. In a folder near the back of the bookshelf, I still kept the ledger, the one I used during the court process. I hadn't opened it in months, but I knew it was there, not as a wound, not anymore, just a reminder. A few days later, a new client walked in, a couple starting a cafe. They brought rough sketches and magazine clippings. I sat across the table from them, nodding as they explained their vision. Near the end of the meeting, the wife leaned in and smiled. "I heard about you," she said. "Someone in my building told me you're the kind of person who knows how to make things work from the ground up." I smiled and opened my notebook. The new cafe project kept us busy through the fall. Daniel and I worked side by side again, just like when we first started, me drafting floor plans, him experimenting with lighting angles until they felt right. We spent hours choosing tile samples and fabric swatches, careful with the budget, proud of the progress. Every detail we touched reminded me how far we'd come. Some nights after the work was done, I'd pause by the studio door on my way out. My name was still there beside Daniel's on the brass plate, and seeing it never got old. It didn't feel like a title anymore. It felt like proof. I didn't hear from Carol or Robert again, not after the last letter, not after the final payment cleared. The silence between us wasn't angry, it was just what it was. A closed door neither of us tried to reopen. I'd stopped expecting apologies, stopped hoping for explanations. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. Lindsay stayed quiet, too. I sometimes wondered where she ended up, whether she landed on her feet or was still figuring it out. But I never reached out. That chapter belonged to another version of me. Now I measure time in projects, in sketches taped to the wall and invoices filed in neat folders. I track our growth in laughter during long nights and photos of finished spaces in the way Daniel still says we every time someone compliments our work. We started talking about buying a home, nothing fancy, just something with enough room for a garden and a small workshop. I'd like a place with good light and a wide front porch, somewhere quiet where we can keep growing into the life we built from the pieces no one else saw value in. I look back sometimes, not out of anger, but to remind myself what I survived. The girl who walked out of that house with a chipped piggy bank and a suitcase didn't know yet what she was capable of. She only knew she couldn't stay, and that was enough. I used to think strength meant sacrifice. that being the dependable one meant being the invisible one, but I see it differently now. Strength is knowing when to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. It's drawing a line and stepping forward even if your voice shakes the first time you say no. Family isn't just the people who raised you. It's the ones who stand beside you when you rebuild. It's the partner who never asked you to be less. It's the quiet faith in yourself that says you are worthy, not someday, not eventually, but now. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt overlooked or used or like you had to earn someone's love by giving up your own future, please hear me when I say this. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. You are already enough. Thanks for spending this time with me. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it or just take a moment to sit with it. And if you're still carrying too much for other people, maybe today's the day you start putting some of it down. I'm glad you were here.